The woman in Ethan Calloway's back seat had no idea her taxi driver was the billionaire she was supposed to marry. Then she looked down at the old brass key resting in her palm and said quietly, "I don't need his love. I need his signature before Friday, or 86 families lose their homes." Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Until that moment, Clara Whitmore had been nothing more than the woman his mother kept insisting he meet. The daughter of an old family friend. Educated, respectable, apparently perfect, and exactly the kind of carefully arranged relationship Ethan had spent years avoiding. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Clara wasn't smiling. She wasn't talking about penthouses, vacations, or becoming Mrs. Ethan Calloway. She looked exhausted. "So you're really going to marry a man you barely know?" he asked. Clara closed her fingers around the key. "If that's what it takes." Ethan should have told her then. He should have pulled the taxi to the curb and admitted that the billionaire whose signature she needed was sitting 6 feet in front of her, wearing a $20 cap. Instead, he asked the question that would eventually cost him the woman he was already beginning to understand. "And what happens if Ethan Calloway finds out why you really said yes?" Clara looked toward the rain running down the window. "Then he'll probably think exactly what everyone else thinks." Her voice stayed steady, but Ethan heard the humiliation underneath it. "That I'm trying to marry into his family because mine doesn't have enough money anymore." She opened her hand again. The brass key was old, scratched near the teeth from decades of use. "My father carried this for 27 years. Harbor House was the first building he ever helped save. He promised the people living there that nobody would turn their homes into another luxury project while he was alive." Clara swallowed. "He died last year. Apparently promises don't survive probate." Ethan knew Harbor House immediately. 3 aging apartment buildings on the south side sat on land that had become far more valuable than anyone expected when Calloway Urban Partners financed their renovation 19 years earlier. His uncle Raymond had been advocating redevelopment for months. Ethan had opposed selling the properties, but the matter had been buried beneath acquisitions, bond negotiations, and a dozen other problems that arrived on his desk every morning. He had never realized Clara believed the sale was days away. More troubling, he had never realized she believed marrying him was her only realistic defense. "What makes you think marriage changes anything?" Ethan asked. Clara gave a tired laugh. "Because your employer probably reads more gossip magazines than I do. Ethan Calloway controls the restructuring committee. His mother made it very clear that if our families became one family, Harbor House would be treated differently." Ethan almost missed the turn. His mother had never told him that. Clara continued, unaware. "I'm supposed to meet him Friday night. If he agrees to the match, Mrs. Calloway says the restructuring can happen before the purchase option is exercised." She looked at Ethan through the mirror. "So yes, I'm considering marrying a stranger. You can judge me." He didn't. That was the problem. Ethan had spent the last 3 years judging almost everyone who approached him. A woman who had once told him she loved his privacy had secretly shared photographs of his home with a lifestyle magazine. Another relationship had ended after he learned that conversations about marriage were being repeated to a publicist. None of it had made Ethan cruel, but it had made him watchful. He had begun asking what people wanted before asking who they were. Marcus Reed, his closest friend and security chief, called it turning suspicion into a personality. Ethan called it survival. The taxi disguise had begun almost accidentally. Marcus's cousin owned a licensed cab company, and months earlier Ethan had joked that he wanted to spend one evening in a place where nobody knew his name. Marcus had arranged it legally under Ethan's middle name, Carter, but made him promise never to turn it into one of his loyalty tests. Ethan had broken that promise almost immediately. He discovered he liked driving. People talked differently when they believed the man behind the wheel had no influence over their lives. He heard arguments, apologies, job worries, first date nerves, and private fears. For a few hours, he was simply Ben Carter. That evening he had taken the cab because Evelyn Calloway had scheduled another conversation about Clara. Ethan needed distance before deciding whether he would attend Friday's dinner. Then Clara herself climbed into the back seat outside a downtown architecture office. The coincidence was so absurd that Ethan nearly laughed. Instead, he drove. When they reached Harbor House, Clara asked him to wait while she carried several folders inside. Ethan watched through the windshield as an older woman with short gray-streaked curls hurried down the front steps to meet her. Two children followed, arguing about an umbrella. Clara crouched to zip the younger child's coat before speaking to the woman. Nobody treated her like a wealthy heiress looking for rescue. They treated her like someone who belonged there. 10 minutes became 20. Ethan could have left. He didn't. Clara eventually returned without the folders and opened the rear door. "I'm sorry. Mrs. Price's grandson flooded the laundry room, and apparently architecture degrees qualify you for plumbing now." Ethan smiled before he could stop himself. "Did you fix it?" "No. I turned off the correct valve and accepted applause I did not deserve." For the first time that night, she smiled too. It changed her face completely. She paid the fare and walked toward the building. Ethan noticed the brass key on the seat after she disappeared inside. He picked it up. For a man who owned towers, hotels, and development rights across several states, the weight of one ordinary key should not have mattered. But he remembered the way Clara had closed her hand around it when she spoke about her father. He carried it to the entrance. Clara opened the door before he knocked. "Please tell me I didn't leave my phone." Worse. Ethan held up the key. Her relief was immediate. "My father would haunt me." "You really believe that?" "No. But Mrs. Price does, and I'm not brave enough to argue with her." Leona Price appeared behind Clara, took one look at Ethan, and smiled. "You're the patient driver." "Apparently. She made you wait 23 minutes. Clara frowned. "You timed me." Leona ignored her. "Come inside before she makes you stand in the rain." Ethan should have declined. Instead, he entered the building that his company was considering replacing with expensive residences. Harbor House was not beautiful in the polished way Calloway developments were beautiful. The tile near the entrance had been repaired with a shade that didn't quite match. The elevator doors closed reluctantly. Someone had taped a child's drawing beside the mailboxes. But the building was clean. The lobby smelled faintly of cinnamon because a resident was selling baked goods for a school fundraiser. Clara knew nearly everyone by name. On one wall hung a photograph of Daniel Whitmore standing beside Ethan's late father, William Calloway, at Harbor House's reopening 19 years earlier. Ethan stopped. Clara noticed. "That's my dad." "And the other man?" "William Calloway, Ethan's father." Ethan stared at the photograph of his father looking younger and happier than he remembered from the final years before his death. "They actually liked each other," Clara said, "which feels strange considering what their children are apparently about to do." "What do you mean?" "My father spent his life trying to keep buildings affordable. Ethan Calloway builds things people like my residents can't afford to enter." "That may be a little unfair." Clara looked at him. "Do you know him?" "Not personally." It was Ethan's first direct lie. The guilt arrived faster than he expected. The next morning Clara called the cab company and requested Ben Carter again. Ethan almost refused. Marcus told him he absolutely should. "You heard what you needed to hear," Marcus said in Ethan's office. "She's not chasing your money." "I didn't say she was." "You didn't have to. Your face has looked offended since breakfast." "She intends to marry me because she wants my vote. She intends to sacrifice herself because she thinks your family is holding 86 homes over her head. That isn't better." "No," Marcus said. "But it is different." Ethan looked toward the folder Marcus had placed on his desk. "Harbor House restructuring documents." Marcus lowered his voice. "Tell her who you are." Ethan stared at the request from the cab company on his phone. Then he picked up his jacket. Clara entered the taxi carrying 2 coffees. "One is black." "You look like someone who doesn't trust flavored syrup." Ethan accepted the cup. "You've known me for 40 minutes. And I'm already concerned about your personality." He laughed. That was how it began. Over the next 3 days, Ethan drove Clara between Harbor House, city planning meetings, and her small architecture office whenever his schedule allowed. He told himself he was investigating the situation. That was partly true. He asked questions about the financing, the residents, and her father's plans. Clara answered because she believed Ben had no reason to use the information against her. But they also talked about things that had nothing to do with Harbor House. Clara hated people who played videos aloud on phones in restaurants. Ethan secretly loved terrible crime documentaries. Clara could not cook rice without burning the bottom of the pot. Ethan knew how because his father had insisted that every Calloway child learn 5 inexpensive meals before receiving a car. Clara laughed so hard at that story, she asked him to repeat it. He never mentioned that the father in the story was William Calloway. Clara eventually asked why he drove a taxi. "People are honest when they think you can't change their lives," Ethan said. She considered that. That sounds like something a suspicious person would say. Maybe I'm a suspicious person. Then you're probably lonely. Her answer landed harder than he expected. At Harbor House, Ethan watched Clara negotiate with contractors, calm frightened residents, and refuse to promise outcomes she couldn't guarantee. When one elderly tenant asked whether she would have to leave her apartment, Clara did not say everything would be fine. She took the woman's hands and said she was fighting for every option still available. That evening, Ethan returned to Calloway headquarters and demanded the entire Harbor House file. Raymond Calloway entered his office 20 minutes later. You suddenly care about 3 buildings we've been discussing for 9 months? I cared 9 months ago. You said you wanted alternatives to demolition. I did, and we found them uneconomic. Ethan opened the restructuring calendar. Why is the purchase option being exercised Friday? Raymond hesitated. That hesitation became Ethan's first clue. The committee accelerated it, Raymond said. Which committee? The Family Finance Committee. My mother isn't supposed to direct operating deadlines. She didn't. Raymond looked away when he said it. Second clue. Ethan found his own memorandum from 4 months earlier recommending a 12-month preservation study. It had never been formally rescinded. Yet Clara had been told the buildings could be lost within days. He called Evelyn. His mother answered from New York. Are you coming Friday? She asked. That depends on why Clara Whitmore thinks marrying me will save Harbor House. Silence. Third clue. Evelyn. His mother's voice became measured. It is not unreasonable for 2 families with aligned interests to consider what their fathers once discussed. My father never discussed my marriage with me. He hoped you wouldn't spend your entire life treating affection like an audit. That isn't an answer. No. It's a mother refusing to conduct an important conversation over the phone. She ended the call. Ethan stared at the screen. He knew something was wrong. He still didn't tell Clara. That choice became harder the next night. She had worked past 10, and instead of asking Ethan to take her home, she asked him to stop at a 24-hour diner. They sat in a booth near the window because Clara said she could not think about contracts while hungry. She pushed half her fries toward him. Friday's the dinner, she said. Ethan's stomach tightened. With Calloway? She nodded. I keep telling myself marriage has always involved practical decisions. Families. Property. Timing. That sounds like you're trying to convince yourself. I am. She looked down. And it isn't working. Ethan waited. Clara touched the small key pendant at her throat. It had been fashioned from a copy of the Harbor House key after her father died. My father spent his whole life telling me never to make a promise with someone else's freedom, she said. And now I'm considering promising my entire life to someone because I'm afraid of what happens to other people if I don't. So don't. Her eyes lifted. It isn't that simple. Maybe it should be. Clara gave him a sad smile. Easy for the taxi driver to say. He deserved that. Then she asked, have you ever stayed in something because leaving might hurt other people? Ethan thought about Calloway Urban Partners. His mother. The board. The thousands of employees whose livelihoods were tied to decisions he made every week. Yes. And I eventually realized staying for the wrong reason can hurt people too. Clara studied him with an expression that made him feel seen in a way he had spent years avoiding. You're strange, Ben. So I've heard. No. I mean, you talk like someone who has had a very expensive therapist. Ethan laughed hard enough that the waitress looked over. Clara laughed too. For several minutes. Neither of them spoke about billionaires, housing, or marriage. That was the first moment Ethan understood he was in trouble. The next afternoon, Marcus entered Ethan's office and found the Harbor House file open beside the taxi keys. You're going to tell her tonight. It wasn't a question. The dinner is tomorrow. That's worse. I want to know what my mother is doing first. No. You want one more day of being the man Clara trusts. Ethan's jaw tightened. Marcus continued. She is talking to Ben because she thinks Ben cannot use her honesty against her. Every hour you keep this going, you are changing the meaning of every conversation she already gave you. Ethan looked away. Marcus was right. Ethan hated him for it. That evening, Clara climbed into the taxi quieter than usual. No coffee. Ethan asked. Budget cuts. You spent $4 yesterday. Exactly. Reckless period of my life. He smiled, but she didn't. After several blocks, she said, I'm not going to do it. Ethan looked into the mirror. The marriage. His pulse changed. I'm going to the dinner because I need to tell them myself. But I can't marry Ethan Calloway to save Harbor House. Why not? Because I would be using him. The words hit Ethan with unexpected force. Clara continued. Maybe he's awful. Maybe he's wonderful. It doesn't matter. He deserves to know whether someone choosing him is actually choosing him. Ethan nearly pulled over. Clara looked out the window and smiled faintly. And I think I've spent so much time trying to save my father's promise that I forgot I'm allowed to make my own. Ethan knew that was the moment. He opened his mouth. His phone rang through the taxi's dashboard before he could speak. Marcus. Ethan rejected it. Important? Clara asked. Yes. Then answer. I'd rather finish this. She looked at him in the mirror. For one quiet second, something passed between them that neither could pretend was merely friendliness. Clara spoke softly. That's another reason I can't marry him. Ethan already knew what she meant. She had begun falling for Ben, and Ben did not exist. Friday evening, Clara arrived at the Calloway residence wearing a deep burgundy dress and the key pendant at her throat. She had rehearsed her refusal in the elevator. She would thank Evelyn for trying to help. She would tell Raymond that Harbor House would continue fighting the purchase option through every ordinary channel available. Then she would leave. A staff member opened the dining room doors. Evelyn stood first. Raymond was beside her. And at the far end of the table, wearing a navy suit instead of a work jacket, was the taxi driver. Clara stopped walking. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Ethan rose. The expression on Clara's face changed slowly. Confusion became recognition. Recognition became disbelief. Then disbelief became pain. Ben. Evelyn looked between them. Ethan stepped forward. Clara. She stared at him. Not Ben. Ethan. Ethan Calloway. The billionaire whose signature she had needed. The stranger she had confessed everything to. The man she had trusted precisely because she believed he had no power over her. How long? She asked. Ethan didn't insult her by pretending not to understand. Since the first ride. Clara closed her eyes. Evelyn said her name, but Clara lifted one hand. Please. The room went silent. Ethan moved closer. The first ride was an accident. I didn't know you would be my passenger. But the second? He couldn't answer quickly enough. The third? Clara. The diner. His silence told her everything. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You wanted to know if I was after your money. At first, I wanted to understand what was happening. So you let me talk. Yes. You let me tell you things I would never have told Ethan Calloway. I know. No, you don't. Her eyes filled, but she refused to let the tears fall. You had every advantage. I told you the truth because I thought you were the one person in this city who had nothing to gain from it. Ethan had no defense. Because she was right. Clara turned toward Evelyn. I came here tonight to tell you I wouldn't marry your son. Evelyn's composure finally shifted. Clara, perhaps tonight is not the time to make permanent decisions. It's exactly the time. Harbor House. No. Clara's voice sharpened. If those families lose their homes because I refuse to marry someone, then whatever you were offering was never help. Raymond stood. Nobody said marriage was a contractual condition. You made sure I believed it was my only realistic option. That is not the same thing. It is when you control the deadline. Ethan looked at Raymond. Clara removed the cream invitation from her purse and placed it on the table. I will not buy 86 roofs with one dishonest marriage. Then she looked at Ethan. The anger in her face hurt less than the disappointment. I hope you find whatever proof you keep demanding from people. She paused. But I hope one day you understand that love cannot survive being examined like evidence. Then Clara walked out. Ethan did not follow her. Every instinct told him to chase her into the rain. Explain himself. Tell her about the old relationships, his distrust, his mother's pressure, and how much the last 3 days had begun to mean. But for once, Ethan understood that following Clara would only be another way of deciding what she needed. So he remained standing beside the table while the front door closed downstairs. If you were Clara, could you forgive someone who learned your most private reasons while pretending to be powerless? Or would that betrayal change every good moment that came before it? Evelyn broke the silence. You have handled this terribly. Ethan turned toward his mother. Something in him changed. I handled it terribly. I did not tell you to deceive her. No. You only convinced her she needed to marry me to protect Harbor House. Evelyn stiffened. Raymond stepped between them verbally. That is an emotional interpretation of a financial situation. Ethan looked at him. Why was the purchase date moved to Friday? Raymond said nothing. Why was my 12-month preservation review never sent to Clara's board? Still nothing. Ethan faced his mother. Did you know? Evelyn sat slowly. Her silence was the answer. For the first time since his father's funeral, Ethan looked at his mother and could not predict what she would say next. "I was trying to protect both of you," Evelyn said. Ethan stared at her. "You manufactured a crisis. I accelerated a decision that was already coming. Why? Because Clara would never ask you for personal help, and you would never meet her long enough to discover who she was. So you put 86 families between us. I believed once you met, the rest would take care of itself." Ethan laughed without amusement. "You tried to arrange affection through leverage." Evelyn's eyes hardened. "Do not stand there pretending you are morally superior. You disguised yourself and listened to her because you wanted leverage of your own. That stopped him. Because she was right too." Evelyn continued more quietly. "Your father worried about you before he died. Not because you were incapable of running the company. Because you had begun believing everyone who loved you needed to pass some invisible examination first." Ethan looked away. "I wanted you to meet someone whose character I trusted. And you thought threatening her father's legacy would help? I thought urgency would force two stubborn people into the same room." Raymond finally spoke. "I agreed to move the option date because the redevelopment is financially superior. I did not care whether anyone married. Frankly, I still don't." There it was. Evelyn had manipulated the relationship. Raymond had exploited the opportunity. And Ethan had turned Clara's vulnerability into his own private test. 3 different justifications. One woman paying the emotional price. The following morning, Ethan arrived at headquarters before 6. He read every page of the Harbor House history himself. 19 years earlier, William Calloway and Daniel Whitmore had created an unusual financing arrangement. Calloway Urban Partners would fund renovations at below-market interest, while Harbor House agreed that if the trust ever became unable to maintain the properties, Calloway would receive the first option to purchase. There was no promise of permanent affordability. But Ethan found something else. For months earlier, his own development team had concluded that Harbor House could remain viable through a mixed financing plan involving tax credits, commercial leases on the ground floors, and phased renovation. The return would be smaller, considerably smaller. But the project worked. Raymond had labeled it inefficient. Evelyn had never shown Clara. Ethan had forgotten it beneath larger negotiations. That fact shamed him almost as much as the taxi. Clara had been preparing to trade away her personal future for a signature Ethan had already been inclined to give. At Harbor House, Clara spent the same morning telling Leona Price the marriage plan was over. Leona did not ask whether Ethan was handsome. She did not ask whether Clara loved him. She asked one question. "Did you choose this?" "Yes." "Then stop apologizing. We may lose the buildings. We may. 86 families, Leona. 86 families are not entitled to your life." Clara looked at her. Leona touched the key pendant at Clara's throat. "Your father wanted you to continue his work. He did not ask you to become collateral." Clara finally cried. Not because she regretted leaving Ethan. Because she realized how close she had come to disappearing inside the responsibility she inherited from her father. 2 days later, Marcus arrived at Harbor House, carrying an envelope. Clara saw him through the glass doors and immediately shook her head. "If Ethan sent flowers, take them back." Marcus almost smiled. He did not. "Jewelry? No. A check? No." He placed the envelope on the desk. "It is a 60-day standstill on the Calloway purchase option. Signed by Ethan. No marriage condition. No meeting request. No personal message." Clara stared at it. "Why are you bringing it?" "Because he thought if he came himself, you would wonder whether the building was being used to get access to you again. That hurt in a different way." Clara opened the envelope. The document did exactly what Marcus said. For 60 days, Harbor House was safe. Temporarily. There was one handwritten sentence beneath Ethan's signature. "This decision should never have depended on whom you married." Clara read it twice. Then she folded the page. She did not call him. Ethan did not call her. For the first time since they met, both allowed the other person to choose the distance. The larger fight was still coming. Raymond placed the redevelopment proposal before the Calloway board 2 weeks later. The numbers were enormous. Demolishing Harbor House and combining the land with 2 neighboring parcels would produce luxury residences, retail space, and a private medical facility. The projected value exceeded the preservation plan by nearly $180 million over 12 years. Several board members supported Raymond. Not because they hated poor people. Because Calloway Urban Partners funded pensions, salaries, construction projects, and debt obligations. To them, Deliberately choosing the lower return plan looked irresponsible. Evelyn asked Ethan to meet privately before the vote. You can preserve a percentage of units in the new development, she said. 30%, which is more than most developers would offer. And the remaining residents? Relocation assistance. Meaning they leave. Meaning companies make compromises. Ethan looked at his mother. This is not really about Harbor House anymore. She knew what he meant. If you vote against Raymond, Evelyn said, the family trust will question whether you can separate personal guilt from corporate judgment. They should. You could lose the chairmanship. Maybe. And Clara may still never forgive you. Ethan met her eyes. I know. That was the first answer Evelyn had not expected. He continued. If I save Harbor House because I think it buys Clara back, then I have learned nothing. At the board meeting, Raymond presented his numbers first. Ethan did not challenge them. He acknowledged that redevelopment would make more money. Then he presented the preservation alternative. Lower returns. Longer renovation. More complicated financing. But sustainable. And 86 families remained. One board member asked the question everyone understood mattered. Would you support this alternative if Clara Whitmore did not exist? Ethan looked at the Harbor House photograph projected behind him. His father beside Daniel Whitmore. Two men who had once believed business could earn money without pretending money was the only value that existed. Yes, Ethan said. Then he voted. The redevelopment failed by one vote. His. The consequences arrived immediately. Raymond requested a governance review of Ethan's chairmanship. Two family trustees supported it. Financial reporters learned that disagreement existed inside Calloway Urban Partners. And someone leaked Clara's name. Within hours, articles suggested that Ethan had sacrificed a profitable project for the woman he intended to marry. That was the final insult. Clara had rejected him, yet the world was about to turn her into exactly the fortune-seeking woman Ethan had once feared she might be. This time Ethan did not hide behind privacy. He authorized a public statement. Clara Whitmore had not asked him to cancel the redevelopment. She had rejected the proposed marriage before the board decision. Harbor House had been preserved because the alternative financing was commercially viable and because Ethan supported its mission. Then he included one sentence his communications team begged him to remove. Ms. Whitmore was more honest with me than I was with her. Any suggestion that she manipulated this decision is false. The statement cost him nothing financially, but it cost Ethan something he had protected almost obsessively for years. Control over how the world saw him. Clara read it alone in her office. For the first time since the dinner, she allowed herself to remember Ben without immediately replacing his face with Ethan's. The man who remembered she hated flavored syrup. The man who waited 23 minutes outside Harbor House. The man who listened when she talked about her father. Those moments had been real. So had the deception. That was what made forgiveness difficult. The lie had not erased the tenderness. The tenderness had not erased the lie. 3 months passed. The Calloway board approved the full Harbor House restructuring. Raymond remained CFO, but was removed from direct authority over the project after the governance review concluded that he had accelerated the purchase schedule without sufficient board disclosure. Evelyn stepped down from the family foundation's matchmaking role in Clara's life, though nobody officially called it that. Ethan retained the CEO position. He did not regain everything else so easily. Clara communicated with Calloway Urban Partners through architects, accountants, and Leona. Then one November afternoon, Ethan arrived at Harbor House for a renovation meeting. No taxi, no cab, no alias. Just Ethan. Clara saw him across the conference table. Mr. Calloway. He nodded. Ms. Whitmore. Leona looked between them and muttered. This is going to be a very long renovation. Neither laughed. Not then. But over the following months, Ethan kept showing up. He did not use the project to force private conversations. When Clara disagreed with his team, he listened. When she rejected Calloway naming rights on the community center, he accepted it. When a construction delay increased costs, he did not remind her what the company had sacrificed. Slowly, Clara saw something she had missed while angry. Ethan was capable of changing without being rewarded for it. That mattered. One evening after a meeting, they found themselves alone on the Harbor House steps. Snow had begun falling lightly. Ethan looked toward the street. I owe you an apology I should have given without explaining myself. Clara waited. I kept testing you long after you had stopped testing me. Her expression changed. He continued. I told myself I needed to understand your motives. The truth is, I was afraid that if you knew who I was, I would lose the version of you that talked to me like I was ordinary. You did lose her. I know. Clara looked down at her hands. Then she surprised him. I owe you something too. You don't. I was preparing to marry a man I didn't love because I wanted access to something he controlled. My reason mattered. But good motives don't automatically make dishonest choices honest. Ethan said nothing. Clara looked at him. I think that's what scared me most about you. You made me realize I was doing my own version of the same thing. They stood quietly. No dramatic kiss. No instant forgiveness. Just the first completely honest conversation they had ever had. 2 weeks later, Clara invited Ethan for coffee. Not Ben. Ethan. He arrived 5 minutes early. She made him wait 7. That was intentional, he said. Growth requires consequences. He smiled. Their second first date happened at the same 24-hour diner where Clara had once explained why she could not marry Ethan Calloway. This time she knew exactly who sat across from her. She still pushed half her fries toward him. He still took them. They talked until the restaurant staff began stacking chairs. Months later, when Ethan asked whether she wanted to attend a Calloway family event with him, Clara said yes only after making him promise that nobody would refer to her as the woman who saved Harbor House. You did save it, he said. We saved it. Raymond will hate that wording. Then definitely use it. Their relationship grew differently from the one Evelyn had tried to engineer. Slowly. Publicly when necessary. Privately whenever possible. There were arguments. Ethan still had moments when suspicion arrived before trust. Clara still tried to carry problems alone. But now they recognized those habits. And neither treated love as permission to ignore them. Almost 18 months after the night Clara first entered his taxi, Harbor House reopened its renovated community wing. The original brick had been preserved. The apartments had new heating systems, safer elevators, and long-term affordability protections. Ethan refused to put the Calloway name on the building. Instead, a small plaque honored Daniel Whitmore and William Calloway. 2 fathers. One promised neither of their children had understood correctly at first. After the ceremony, Clara stepped outside expecting Ethan's car. A yellow taxi waited at the curb. She stopped. The driver's window rolled down. Ethan was wearing the same dark cap. Clara laughed before she reached the door. You cannot be serious. I am told nostalgia performs well. By whom? My very expensive therapist. She opened the back door, then paused. No. Ethan watched as she came around the car and sat in the passenger seat beside him instead. That seat available? For you? He pretended to consider it. Depends where you're going. Clara looked at him. Ethan reached into the center console and placed something in her palm. The old brass Harbor House key. She had lost it during the renovations months earlier. You kept this. I learned not to keep things that belong to you without permission. She smiled. Better answer. Then Ethan took a small ring box from his jacket. Clara's smile disappeared. He did not open it yet. The first time our families talked about us marrying, neither of us was really choosing, he said. The first time you considered saying yes, you were trying to save 86 families. And the first time I wanted you to choose me, I was pretending to be somebody else. He opened the box. So I'm asking once, with no deadline, no property, no board vote, and no one waiting for your answer except me. Clara looked at the ring, then at Ethan. Why do you want to marry me? His answer came without hesitation. Because when you know exactly who I am, you still tell me when I'm wrong. Because you protect people without needing them to know what it costs you. Because you make me laugh when I'm trying very hard not to. And because loving you taught me that trust is not something another person proves while I hide safely behind a test. Clara's eyes filled. She did not answer immediately. Ethan waited. That was part of what he had learned. Finally she smiled. Yes. He exhaled. But there is one condition. His eyes narrowed. What? You never test me by pretending to be poor again. Agreed. And I get to drive sometimes. That sounds dangerous. She hit his arm. Ethan laughed, slipped the ring onto her finger, and started the taxi. Then he looked at the woman his family had once expected him to marry, the woman who had once intended to marry him without loving him, and the woman who had eventually chosen him only after she no longer needed anything his name could provide. Where to? Clara looked through the windshield at Harbor House glowing behind them. Then she turned back toward him. Home. And for the first time since the night she entered his taxi, neither of them had to wonder what the other person meant.